Do you know anything about the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors and the brothers?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, tell me about this story.
His dad gave him a coat of many colors because he was his favorite.
He had a colorful sweater, and his brothers were jealous. But his other brothers didn't really like his coat of many colors. I think his brothers were jealous, and they wanted one too. And they threw him into this well.
And they sold him.
They sold them to... You remember, Claire? The Egyptians. They took his coat, and then they killed a sheep, and they took the sheep's blood and dipped his coat into the blood, and then he gave the coat to his dad, saying that Joseph died.
Would you sell your brother?
No.
Would you sell your sister?
No. Not at all. No. 0% chance.
We're like unapproachable. Like I just can't step away from him.
Would you sell Hutch?
No.
Would you sell Riley? How much do you think, if you did, how much do you think you would sell him for?
$100. I would sell him for like $6,000. Maybe 300 million thousand.
A penny.
And I would do 20. And then one day, Pharaoh had this dream, so they were watching out because he had a dream. Joseph showed up, and they knew the dream. So then his brothers came. Joseph put on a test to see if they've changed, and the little brother Benjamin, they put a silver cup in his bag, pretending he stole it. And then his brothers were very sorry, so then they know that he changed. But he forgave his brothers.
We should all forgive, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
We should forgive, like...
Even though my sister bites me a lot.
Well, there you go. In case you missed it, top 10 Bible story, number 9, Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And our kids got a lot of story detail in that, right? So families who've got your kids separated or represented up there, good for you. Teaching moms and dads. Kids ministry, good for you. So exciting. So we are in this new series. If you're new with us, welcome. We're in a summer series that we're calling, in case you missed it, Top 10 Bible Stories for a Life of Faith, according to the kids of Lake Norman Baptist. So we put together this top 10 list. We're counting them down throughout the 10 weeks of summer. So we are on number 9, toward the beginning of the series. So it's a great time to jump in and see where the series goes from here. And so in the story of Joseph, in case you missed it, what we're going to see today is really the story of a family's healing. There's a lot of things that are a part of this story that we'll see, but ultimately, more than anything else, this is a story of family healing. And it's a story of how 2 individuals in this particular family were uniquely used by God to bring that healing, to bring healing from a place of deep brokenness to a place of wholeness. And then from a place of wholeness to a place of fullness as the blessings and healing in this family spread to other families in the world as well. And so as we get into this story, I just want to put a couple of questions on our radar about how we can interact with this story of family healing and how God used a couple of members of this family to bring that healing. And the first is this: I wonder for you today, what kind of healing does your family need? We all need healing of various different kinds. Families are not perfect. There's not one perfect family on the planet. So what kind of healing does your family need? And I think you may find some encouragement as we get to know Jacob's family in this story. And then secondly, I want you to be thinking about, as we go through this story, how can God use you to bring healing to your family? We're going to see the story of 2 very different family members, 2 very different stories within this broader story. And I wonder if you might hear God speak to you about the role that he might be calling you to play in the healing that he wants to bring to your family today. So let's get into it. Top 10 Bible stories. Number 9, it's the story of Joseph. This is from Genesis chapters 37 through 40. And to give us some framing for this, because we're going to see a lot of moving parts in this story, I want to invite you into my office. And this is my whiteboard. If you were to go down the hall and down the stairs and walked into my office right now, you would see this diagram as I try to get my mind around the movements of this story. So just want us to visually kind of prepare for what's going to come. This story unfolds in 4 movements. It begins in Genesis chapter 37 with a very broken family, the family of Jacob. And then we see 2 of Jacob's 12 sons and the unique role that they're called to play. So movement 2 moves into Genesis chapter 38, and this is the story of Judah, who was brother number 4 of the 12. And we're going to see in one chapter about 20 years of Judah's life. And then we're going to move to movement 3, which is actually going to go back to the same starting point, and we're going to see what was happening in Joseph's life around the same time that we had just seen Judah's story, and that's movement 3. And then we're going to see how these 2 stories come together in the healing that came to Jacob's family, and that's teased out in chapters 42 through 50. So 4 movements: the brokenness of Jacob's family, the story of how God worked through Judah over about a 20-year period, then the story of what he did in Joseph's life over that same 20-year period, and then how the story comes together and how God brought healing to this family. And so here's the context for these 4 movements. So Genesis 12, toward the early part of Genesis, we find the story of Abraham. Abraham's the one where God chose him out of all the nations, and he made a promise to Abraham that his descendants were going to bless the nations of the world. And so this is the time of the patriarchs. And Genesis 12 through Genesis 35 is the story of Abraham and his son Isaac. And then picking up in chapter 36, we have the sons of Isaac, Jacob and Esau. And chapter 36, is the story of Esau. So in one chapter, we get the story of Esau's family and their descendants, which brings us to chapter 37, and this is the story of Jacob. And this is where we're going to jump in. I'm going to read the first several verses of the story of Jacob's family, and then we're going to see how this movement unfolds to bring healing to this family. And the first thing we're going to see is Jacob's broken family. And this brokenness looked like a number of things. It looked like favoritism in the family, which is not usually a good thing. It looks like hatred and deception in this family. And I just think whatever family drama you and I are experiencing today probably pales in comparison when we get to know Jacob's broken family. So here we go. Genesis 37, beginning in verse 1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. So in case you missed it, the story of Joseph is actually part of the story of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel, which is another name for Jacob, Jacob was renamed Israel, so when you see these names, they're interchangeable. Jacob is Israel. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him, the coat of many colors, the amazing Technicolor dream coat. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream. And this time, the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And so begins the story of Jacob's broken family. And it started with Joseph and this bad report that he brought to their father about the other brothers. And we don't know how innocent or how, strategic that report was. Maybe Joseph was entirely innocent and they were really doing things that Jacob needed to know about. Or maybe Joseph was pretty pleased to bring the bad report on his 10 older brothers out in the field. Whatever the case, he brings this bad report. His brothers hate him, and then we see the story of this colored coat, which was a symbol of their father's favoritism. It was also a symbol of the brothers' hatred. And then we see these dreams that Joseph had. The first dream that the brothers would bow down to him. The second dream that not just the brothers, but mom and dad, Jacob and Rachel, they're gonna bow down to him as well. And it's interesting, even though we know Jacob loved Joseph more than any of the others, so much that he bought him this fancy coat, that dream was even too much for Jacob, right? Do you see that? Jacob's like, "I don't know about this dream you had. I love you and all, but you really think mom and dad and your brothers are all gonna bow down to you?" And it says he thought about it. He kept it in mind, which is a very interesting detail in this story. Because the very next thing we see is that Jacob sends Joseph out to check on his brothers in the field. In the very next verses, time passed, the 10 brothers are out in the field again, and he sends Joseph out to check on them and see how things are going in the field. Well, that gave rise to all sorts of things that maybe Jacob did not intend. But whatever Jacob intended, whatever the reason that he sent Joseph out into the field, this is what it led to. Because when Joseph went out to check on his brothers in the field, now they've got an opportunity to do something with this brother that they hate so much. This dreamer that says they're all going to bow down to him, and it said they plotted to kill him. And Reuben, who was the oldest of the 12, stepped forward and he says, hey, let's not get carried away. Let's not kill him. Let's do this. Let's beat him up and throw him into the bottom of a well. How about that? That'd be a good plan. And what we know in the story, which is interesting, Reuben actually had a plan. He was going to come back and pull Joseph out of the well and take him back home and kind of be the one who saved the day for Joseph. He's big brother. He's taking responsibility. But while Reuben was away, here comes Judah. And this is the beginning of seeing Judah, brother number 4, begin to exercise his influence in the family. And he says, hey, I see a group of Ishmaelites coming down the road. These are slave traders and merchant traders. They're going to Egypt. How about this? Let's make a little money off our brother Joseph. Let's pull him up out of the well. Let's sell him. And then let's make up a plot to make our dad, Jacob, believe that he got killed, that he died. So that's what they did. Judah's idea wins the day. They all rally around it. So they sell off Joseph to the Ishmaelites. He's headed to Egypt. And then they take the coat, the amazing Technicolor dream coat. They kill a goat. They dip it in his blood. They bring it back to Jacob and say, I don't know what happened, Jacob, but we think this might be, maybe, that fancy coat that you gave Joseph. You look at it and see, because up to you. Well, of course, Jacob recognizes the coat and he just grieves and he thinks that his son has been killed by a wild animal. And then the chapter closes with Joseph having been sold off to the Ishmaelites, and they make it to Egypt, and then they sell him to somebody else whose name was Potiphar. He was one of the administrators in Pharaoh's administration in Egypt. He was the captain of Pharaoh's guard, and that's where the chapter closes. This is an introduction to an extraordinarily dysfunctional family. And I don't know what kind of family drama you're experiencing right now, but if God can heal this family, he can heal your family. This is a very dysfunctional family, but as bad as it is, it's about to get worse. Because the next movement of this story is maybe, if we're thinking about what we missed, if you grew up here in this story, if you've heard it recently, I know for me, I totally missed Genesis chapter 38. And you'll see why nobody talks about Genesis chapter 38. Because Genesis chapter 38 is the story of Judah's spiral to the bottom. And the next movement in this story, this account of Jacob's family line, is a story of depravity. It's a story of humiliation. It's a story that ultimately ended, though, with confession out of a place of humbling. So here's a snapshot of the next 20 years in Judah's life. And this is going to be important when we come to the healing movement a little bit later on in the story. So here's what happened with Judah. Chapter opens, a little bit of time has passed since Joseph was sold off, and it said Judah went to go hang out with his buddy Ira the Adullamite. Now, the way I think about Ira is like he's the bad dude from around the corner. Like when people hang out with Ira, bad things go down. And Judah, he's hanging out, with the pagan kid around the corner. So he's spending time with Ira the Adullamite. And then over the course of time, Judah gets married to somebody kind of in that crowd, and he has 3 sons. Judah's first son, he finds a wife for. Her name is Tamar. But the text tells us that God saw this first son as wicked in his eyes, and God killed him. So first son, he's dead and gone, and he's widowed this young woman named Tamar. So as they did in this day, when one brother died and left a widow, he went to the next brother in line and said, hey, you need to marry your brother's widow, and you need to have kids to carry on his family line. Well, brother number 2 wasn't having it. He's like, I'm not having kids to give to my brother. God says that's also wicked. God wipes him out. So the first 2 sons, dead. They were wicked in God's eyes, which leaves little brother Shelah. We don't name our boys Sheila so much these days, but that was his name. Little brother Shelah. And Judah makes a promise to Tamar, who's now been widowed twice. Says, hey, I got another son. He's not of age yet, but when he grows up, I'm going to give you to him, and you can have the honor of carrying on the family line and all the things. But we got to wait some time here. And so he sends Tamar back to her father's house. So Tamar's waiting for Shelah to grow up. Meantime, Judah's wife dies. A lot of death happening in Genesis 38. And we see Judah hanging out with his buddy Ira again, passing some time. And when Tamar finds out that Judah's wife has died, she has an idea for how to carry on the family line. So Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute, and she goes and sits by the town gate where she knows Judah is going to be passing by. Why would she do that? I think she probably knew some things about Judah. She's like, yeah, he'll take the bait. Sure enough, he did. So Judah's coming along. He sees this prostitute. He doesn't know that it's his daughter-in-law, Tamar, and he says, hey, I'd like to get some services from you. And so the price for her services was a goat. So she said, all right, you give me a goat, and then we can do the transaction. Well, he didn't have a goat with him. So he says, well, I'll bring you a goat. And she says, well, in the meantime, what are you going to give me as a security deposit? How about your family seal, your family cord, and the staff that you're carrying? Judah says, all right, I'll give you these things, which were clear identifiers of who he is. Did the deed, then he goes off to get the goat and bring it back. Time he comes back with the goat, Tamar's gone. And he and his buddy Ira are looking around for this prostitute who was just there. But nobody seems to know anything about her, and they're like, we don't know anything about this. And Ira says, hey, Judah, why don't you keep this quiet? I don't know that you want to advertise what just went down, and it's pretty embarrassing that now you're walking around with this goat. And around this time, we read Genesis 38, verses 24 through 26. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution. And as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Of course, Judah recognized them and said, she's more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give my daughter Shelah to her. And so as humiliating as that was, as depraved as it all was, you see this glimmer of humility coming from Judah. And he actually confesses, yeah, I'm not very righteous. And then the story goes on. He has twins through Tamar, Zerah and Perez, and the family line is going to go through the younger of the twins, the second twin to come out. It's a story you can read about. But what's interesting about that detail is Judah's sons, he had a set of twins, and their story is almost identical to his father, Jacob's story. Jacob was the second of two twins, Esau and Jacob. And contrary to the normal birthright, the second twin is the one who carried on the family line. This was true for Judah's father, and it's true for Judah's son. And it's a signal for the role Judah is ultimately going to play in this story. But for now, what we've seen is Judah's spiral to the bottom. We've seen his depravity. We've seen his humiliation. And we've seen this confession that might be the beginning of a turn for this scoundrel Judah. And then we move to Genesis chapter 39 and the third movement of the story, which brings us back, and we're going to see what was happening in Joseph's life during the time all this was happening with Judah. So while Judah was spiraling to the bottom, we're going to see that Joseph was rising to the top. And Joseph's rise to the top came through integrity, came through consistency, came through faith. And we see it episode after episode, and these are the stories we love. These are the ones that the kids talk about and we all remember because they're just really cool stories in the life of Joseph, and they document his rise to the top. So remember, we left off at the end of Genesis 37. They sold him to the slave traders. The slave traders sold him to Potiphar. Potiphar is the captain of Pharaoh's guard, so he's right up near the top in Egypt. And here he is. So he's in Potiphar's house, and Joseph, who's just a great guy, he's smart, he's got integrity, things go well for Joseph. And Potiphar notices this, and he puts Joseph in charge of everything. So Genesis 39:6 tells us this. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. He trusted Joseph big time. Joseph experienced a meteoric rise in power and authority there in Potiphar's house, which would have been a pretty powerful house. But with that rise in power and authority, some people took notice, not least of which, Potiphar's wife. The text says, Joseph's a handsome young dude. He's got all this power and authority. She noticed, and she starts going after him. And she just keeps on relentlessly trying to seduce him. Come to bed with me, come to bed with me, come to bed with me. Joseph says, no, no, no. And then we get to this event in Genesis 39, 11, and 12. It says, one day, Joseph went into the house to attend to his duties. None of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Notice the contrast between Judah and Joseph. Judah, Tamar knew that dude was going to take the bait for anything he can get. Joseph had integrity. He was not going to sin against his God and against this family. And so he refused. Well, that was humiliating to Potiphar's wife, so she made up a different story. And she says, he was coming after me, and when I screamed for help, he ran, and now I've got his coat. So she takes it to Potiphar. He believes her story. She framed him. And then the end of that chapter is now Joseph went from being sold into slavery. Now he's in a prison there in Egypt. And this is where we see that in addition to his integrity, we see Joseph's consistency. Because just as much as he had lost power through being framed, he's going to gain it all back again in really short order. So Genesis 39, toward the tail end of the chapter, says this. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. And he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. You see this consistency in the story? Both Potiphar and now the warden of this prison, whatever Joseph was in charge of, they didn't need to worry about it because he had such integrity, because he had such consistency. And so he rose to power once again. This time it was in a prison. And from that seat of influence within the prison, he would hear stories. And two stories came from what the text calls a a cupbearer and a baker. Now, these were two servants in Pharaoh's household, and we're told that in the course of time, they offended the Pharaoh. Doesn't say what they did, but they offended him enough that they got thrown into prison. Well, this cupbearer and this baker, they both had dreams. They didn't know what the dreams meant, but they were troubled. And so word comes to Joseph, and Joseph says, hey, what's troubling you so much? Tell me these dreams that you had. Well, the cupbearer says, I had this dream, and there was this vine, and it had 3 branches of grapes on it, and I was squeezing the grapes into Pharaoh's cup, and he was drinking it, and I don't know what that means. Joseph says, hey, good news for you. In 3 days, you're going back to your old job. You're going to be serving Pharaoh again. All's going to be well. And the only thing I ask of you, Mr. Cupbearer, is that you remember me when you get there. Like, can you put in a good word for me with Pharaoh? Because I shouldn't be here to begin with, and I'd like it if you remembered me when you get blessed. So that was the request of the cupbearer. Baker tells his dream. I had 3 baskets on my head. They're full of bread for the Pharaoh, but these birds keep coming, and they're eating the bread out of the basket. And Joseph says, not so good of news for you, because in 3 days, you're going to be executed. Sure enough, both dreams came true. In 3 days, the cupbearer went back to his old job. Everything's good. The baker, he's executed. Not so good for him. But here's Joseph's opportunity, right? The cupbearer can be his advocate before Pharaoh. But the end of the story, here it comes like you might predict. Genesis 40, verse 23. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. So as soon as there's hope and there's promise in Joseph's rise, once again, there's this setback in the story of Joseph. But not to be deterred, Joseph in his integrity, Joseph in his consistency soldiered on. And after 2 years, there were some more dreams that came along. This time it was the Pharaoh who had some dreams. And so Pharaoh has these dreams, and kind of like the story of Daniel, like he doesn't know what these dreams mean. He's all upset by them. He's asking all the wise men and the teachers in Egypt. He's like, can anybody tell me what this means? Nobody can tell him what this means. And then you guessed it, the cupbearer. Wait a minute. And the text is so funny in the chapter. It's like he came to his senses. He remembered his folly. It's like he was embarrassed that he had forgotten about Joseph. And he says, Joseph. And so he mentions Joseph to Pharaoh, which leads to this description in Genesis 41. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. So Joseph has now moved from Potiphar's house, where we saw his integrity, to the prison, where we saw his consistency. And now he's in Pharaoh's palace in front of the king, Pharaoh himself, and we see Joseph's faith. I'm not the one who can tell you your dream, but God can tell you your dream, so lay it on me. Pharaoh says, all right, here's my dream. I'm standing by the Nile River. Out of the Nile come these 7 really healthy looking cows. Very good. But then, strange, behind these 7 healthy cows come these 7 ugly, skinny, scraggly looking cows, and they eat the 7 healthy cows. And Pharaoh said, that's when I woke up. And you know how you wake up from a dream and you're like in a cold sweat, it's like these lucid dreams, and they seem so real. That's what happened to Pharaoh. I woke up, and that's what it was. Well, then he went to sleep again, and he had a second dream. This time, it was a dream of these sheaves of grain. And he said, I saw this really healthy stalk of grain, and it had 7 really robust heads of grain on it. Very healthy for, harvesting and making bread and all the things. But then, really weird, like behind these 7 healthy heads came these 7 really scraggly, sickly-looking heads, and they replaced the healthy-looking heads of grain. And once again, he wakes up, and he's all troubled. Joseph, what does this mean? Well, Joseph, here's the interpretation. He says, well, Pharaoh, this is one and the same dream. And God has given you this same dream twice to let you know, and this is a detail in the story that you might have missed. He said, God gave you this dream twice because he's going to do something that he has firmly decided is going to happen. And what's going to happen is that you're going to have 7 years of plenty where we're going to get all the harvest and grain that we can stand. But then after that, there's going to be 7 years of famine. So bad that we're all going to forget how good the 7 good years were. And this is a double dream because it's double secure from God that Pharaoh, this is going to happen. And so Joseph's advice to Pharaoh is this: Pharaoh, you need to go and find somebody in your kingdom that can manage these next 7 years and store up some grain and get it ready for the 7 years of famine so not everybody starves. Pharaoh says, that's a great idea. Let me see if I can find somebody like that. So Pharaoh goes to all his people. He's like, hey, do we know anybody like this? Nope, nobody. Nobody's up to the task. Pharaoh comes back to Joseph, and you guessed it. Joseph, how about you? And so here is the elevation of Joseph from Pharaoh. Genesis 41, 39 and 40. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. And then here comes Joseph's new life. So Pharaoh gives Joseph new clothes. He gives him a new car. Joseph's going to ride around in a chariot, and all the people are going to go make way for Joseph. He's going to be so prominent that they're going to part traffic for Joseph in his new ride. He gave him a new name. He gave him a new wife. And here's the summary of Joseph's new life, his rise to the top in Genesis 41. It says Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Remember, all this started when he was 17, so 13 years went by. Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea, so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, so that Potiphar name might have been popular around the time, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. So you got 13 years that passed. Joseph came into Pharaoh's service at age 30, and then you've got 7 more years that passed during the 7 years of plenty. And then it was time for the famine to come. And when Pharaoh's dream came true about the famine, Joseph's old dreams came true as well about his family bowing down to him, which leads to the 4th movement in the story and the healing that came for Jacob's family. And this healing is a story of humility. It's a story of forgiveness. It's a story of reconciliation. And so as the famine had come, people are running out of food, and the problem is coming to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you to do. And the text tells us that this was true for Egypt, like all the Egyptians and all the Canaanites and the other people of the other lands around Egypt. They were all coming to Joseph to get food in the famine, including Joseph's brothers, representing the family back in Canaan. They were experiencing the famine as well. And so, humbled by the famine, they came seeking food in Egypt because they had heard, like everybody else, that's the only place you're going to get food. And they came to encounter Joseph in their time of need. When they did this, we learned that Joseph recognized them, but they didn't recognize him. Maybe it's because of his new Egyptian clothes. Maybe it's because he's using an interpreter, the text says. Maybe they weren't standing all that close, but for whatever reason, he knew them. They didn't know him. And here they were in this humbled time of need. And reading the text, you can tell that Joseph, he weeps when he sees them. He has this heart for his family, but he's going to test them and see if these are the same dudes that they were 20 years ago, or if they've experienced any growth. And so he says, you're just spies. You didn't come to get food. You came to spy on our land. And they said, no. That's not us. In fact, we are among 12 brothers. There's 10 of us here, but we had another brother, and he is no more. And we have the youngest brother, and he's back home with our father. And so it's the 10 of us representing the family. We swear to you, this is the truth. And he says, I don't know. I don't believe you. Why don't you go back home? I'll give you some food for now, but go back home and bring that youngest brother to me. And then we'll just see if you're telling the truth. And this is how the brothers replied. Genesis 42 said, they said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother, Joseph. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life. But we wouldn't listen, and that's why this distress has come on us. 20 years of guilt that they'd been carrying since they beat up and sold their brother off into slavery. 20 years of maintaining this lie that their father still doesn't know what went down all those years ago. And all this guilt and all this shame is bubbling up. And it's fascinating, isn't it, that as soon as they were pressed, as soon as they came into some stress, their mind went to Joseph. Front of mind was their guilt over what they did to Joseph. And when Joseph overhears this, he weeps. He weeps at hearing the heart of his brothers. But Joseph is smart. We get a window into Joseph's character here. He has a heart for his family. He has a heart for his brothers. But he also wants to see if there's been some growth. He's gonna put them to the test. He's got some discernment. He's got some self-respect. He's got some wisdom. And so he says, all right, go back and bring your brother back, and here's some grain for you to eat in the meantime. Well, the first test was he put some silver in those sacks. The money that they bought the grain with, he gave it back to them, put it in their sacks. They didn't know it until they got way on down the road, and they realized, oh my goodness, the money that we gave for the grain is in here. He's gonna think we stole it. This is not good. So over the course of time, they come back. They bring the silver back. Good on them. They brought their younger brother back. Also good on them. So they're beginning to pass the test here, but Joseph gives them one more test. Now that Benjamin, the youngest brother, is there, he says, all right, giving you grain, gonna send you on your way, and they leave again. But what they didn't know was he had taken his silver cup, sort of his special cup, and he put it in one of their sacks of grain, and off they went. Well, then he sends his steward, one of his hitmen, to get the brothers on their way away. And he says, hey, stop. One of you stole Joseph's cup. Of course, they're like, we didn't steal Joseph's cup. And so they come back in front of Joseph, and Joseph says this, hey, we're going to go through your sacks of grain, and whoever's got my cup, that one's going to be my slave. Because you're stealing from me, and that's it. You're going to be my slave and serve me. The rest of you can go on your way, but the one that's got the cup, staying with me. Well, of course, who had the cup? Benjamin. The youngest brother had the cup. And so it's exposed. He says, that one, he's staying with me. And here's where Judah re-enters the story. And here's where that confession and the humbling of Judah begins to have a role to play. Because Judah, remember, the one who had the idea in the first place to sell Joseph, Judah steps forward and he says, wait, please. You're going to kill my father if we don't go back with Benjamin. He says, take me instead. And Judah makes this plea to Joseph. He says in Genesis 44, now then, please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return to his brothers. So here's a very different Judah than 20 years before. It would be around this time that he was humiliated by Tamar and had to come to grips with his own depravity. And maybe that confession of his unrighteousness with Tamar kind of softened him, and God began to work on him and prepare him for this moment. Because when this transformed Judah steps up to say, I will be the sacrifice. I will be the one to lay down my life for the sake of my brother. It was a reversal of what he had done 20 years before. And that was when the healing began to happen. It was after Judah's speech that Joseph let down his ruse, and he said, brothers, it's me. It says Joseph wept so loudly that all the Egyptians around could hear it, and they wondered what was going on. And then the healing waters began to flow. Said they reconciled and they talked with each other. And in Genesis 45, we see this. It says, then he threw his arms around Benjamin, and he wept. And Benjamin embraced him, and weeping, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And afterwards, his brothers talked with him. And do you remember 20 years ago, they hated him so much they couldn't say a word to him. But now, there's healing happening. There's reconciliation happening. It came in the form of a confession and redemption on the part of Judah. And it came on the part of forgiveness from Joseph. And so as a result of all of this, Joseph says, go back, brothers. Bring our father Jacob. Bring the rest of the family. There's 5 more years of famine left, but we're going to take care of you here in Egypt. And here's where the part of the story comes that's significant for God's plan in history. This is how Jacob's family went from Canaan down to Egypt to survive the famine and set up the rest of salvation history. So we see this all flow out in Genesis 46 and 47. So God spoke to Israel, Jacob, in a vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob, here I am, he replied. I am God, the God of your father, he said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. A little bit later on, all those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those were his direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbered 66 persons. With the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family, which went to Egypt, were 70 in all. So this early form of Jacob's family, 70 people, moved into Egypt to escape the famine. And then Genesis 47 says, Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their children. And then in the closing chapters, we see these blessings. So Jacob, he's there with his family that's experienced miraculous healing from what it was 20 years prior. And he begins to pour out these blessings. He blesses Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And then in Genesis 49, the next to the last chapter in Genesis, he pronounces blessings on each of his 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is the beginning that all the rest of Israel's history is defined from Genesis to Revelation around these 12 tribes and the outflowing of these blessings that Jacob pronounced on them. And he had a blessing for each of the 12, but guess which 2 stood out? Joseph and Judah. Hear what he had to say in his blessing to Joseph, who was used by God to bring healing from brokenness to wholeness in his family through his integrity, consistency, and faith. Genesis 49:22. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness, archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility, but his bow remained steady. His strong arm stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. So Joseph was blessed for the role of healing that God had used him to bring in Jacob's family. And then on down, there's the blessing that he gave to Judah, the one who God would use to bring blessing from wholeness to fullness in God's plan of salvation, not only for Israel, but for the world. Here's what Jacob had to say in his blessing to Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah. The scepter would be the indication of kingship. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. So here's a messianic prophecy. There's going to be a descendant of Judah to whom every nation would one day bow. Fast forward to the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, first 3 verses. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Tamar is one of 4 women who get mentioned in the genealogy of the ancestors of Jesus. She's the first one. You know who the second one was? We met her last week. Rahab the prostitute from Jericho. Then we have Ruth, who is another non-Israelite, and Mary. And so Tamar had a place in history. She outrighteoused her father-in-law, Judah, and continued the family line that eventually yielded Jesus himself, the Messiah. Why would God use a woman like Tamar? Why would God use a man like Judah? Because God's plan of salvation is not about perfection. It's about redemption. From Genesis to Revelation. And in Revelation 5:5, we see this. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." And so at the end of time, it's Jesus, the Lion, the King from the tribe of Judah, that's going to make all things right. He would bring healing, not only from wholeness to fullness in Jacob's family, but through the gospel, the good news of Jesus and the message of salvation to the entire world. Joseph, used by God to bring healing from brokenness to wholeness. Judah, used by God to bring healing from wholeness to fullness. This deeply broken, dysfunctional family to one that would be that blessing and good news for the entire world. God brought healing. So I come back to where we started. What kind of healing does your family need? If God can bring healing to Jacob's family, he can bring healing to yours. He can bring healing to mine. And then how might God want to use you to bring healing to your family? Maybe God's calling you to be the Joseph in your family, to be the one with integrity, to be the one with consistency and faith, who's just gonna hold the guard through the ups and downs in your family while God is at work accomplishing his plans. Maybe that's the role God is calling you to. Or maybe you're the Judah. Maybe you've done some things in the past that have brought great harm and you see it now. And maybe it's that story of redemption in your life, of repentance, confession, forgiveness. Maybe God wants to use the new you to bring healing in your family in the way that he used Judah. God can bring healing to your family, and he can do it through you. And when he does, it won't be ultimately through you, just like it wasn't ultimately Joseph and it wasn't ultimately Judah. It's the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Messiah, Jesus, who can bring healing through you in whatever way that your family is hurting and broken today. Would you bow with me? I just want to give us a moment before we sing in response to consider that need for healing. What is it for you and your family? How does your family need healing? And I invite you to just name it before God. Whatever is burdening your heart, whatever you're carrying on behalf of the family that you're a part of or that you're representing, whatever that brokenness. Know that if God can bring healing to a family like Jacob's, he can bring healing to yours. Whether it's 20 years old, the hurt, 50 years old, 2 days old, God can bring healing to you and your family. And I wonder how God might want to use you. Is he calling you to be that Joseph figure? To lean hard on God with integrity and consistency and faith while you wait for God to accomplish his plans? If that's you, I want to pray that God would strengthen you. God would give you the faith to see beyond what everybody else around you sees. God would give you the heart to love people who are super duper hard to love. that he would keep your heart soft and tender toward people that are shooting bitter arrows your way. Knowing that God can use you to bring healing. And if you're hearing this story and you go, I'm the Judah, it's me. I got some things I need to confess. I need to seek forgiveness. Maybe the journey begins for you with turning to Jesus, confessing your sins to him first, asking forgiveness from God, and healing in your own heart. You might come to him and receive the good news of salvation for you as a follower of Jesus. And then you might be called to do the hard work of confessing your sin to someone around you. Maybe it's a family member that you know you've hurt. Maybe it's someone who's no longer even with us, and you don't know how to ask for forgiveness or to extend forgiveness if that was the Judah. My prayer for you is that you would experience and cultivate that heart of releasing the guilt, releasing the bitterness, and letting God take it and bring healing in you and through you for your family and those who are close to you. If God can heal Jacob's family, he can heal yours, and he can use you. Father in heaven, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, thank you for this word of encouragement to us. Thank you for this message of healing. Thank you for this window into how you work in the Josephs of the world, in the Judahs of the world. And I pray that you would call each one of us into our place in your story for the sake of our families, for the sake of this church family, for the sake of this community around us, for the sake of the world. We pray for your healing. And we ask you to use us. In Jesus' name, amen.
If you would, please stand and join us as we sing.